13. Ruth 2, 17 through 23, if I can get situated here. And we've entitled it, Wait Till Naomi Hears This. We spoke earlier of the harvest, the barley and the wheat harvest lasting about 7 weeks. Let me have you check out something in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 16, verse 9. You shall count 7 weeks, there's the 7 weeks, for yourself. You shall begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. Well, what's the significance of that, that little blurb from Deuteronomy for us? Well, 7 weeks, that's what, 49 days? The following day would be the 50th. Think about that. That's the time from the Passover to what is called the Feast of Weeks. And the 50th day was to be called First Fruits. Later, it was called Pentecost. Makes sense now? The 50 days from the crucifixion to the falling of the Holy Spirit in Jerusalem. Well, recall from the last section that we talked about Boaz showing an ever-increasing interest in Ruth and responded by giving her benefits well beyond what any gleaner, there I go again, might expect. And it was way beyond what the law required as well. Now, we're going to pick up the story of Ruth on that first day of gleaning as it drew on and to an end. Verse 17 of chapter 2. So she, Ruth, gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out, she threshed what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah, E-P-H-A-H, of barley. An ephah was something over half a bushel. That means it was over 20 quarts. That, folks, is over 5 gallons. You ever seen a 5-gallon bucket of paint or something? That's a goodly amount of grain. And it perhaps weighed as much as 40 to 50 pounds. So this Ruth had really been to work, but it wasn't any normal pickings, and it certainly wasn't slim pickings, with deference to all you Western fans. Check out the last statement, though. As we said a minute ago, Ruth didn't just glean, she actually went to the trouble to thresh her pickings after a long, hard day of gleaning. And the amount gleaned represented several weeks of food or sustenance for the two women, Naomi and Ruth. Well, Ruth's next move is not unexpected. It'd be what you think of her. Verse 18, and she took it, the barley gleanings that is, and went into the city, Bethlehem, and her mother-in-law, Naomi, saw what she had gleaned. She also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. You remember that event? Well, not only did Ruth have the barley, but she also brought to Naomi the leftovers from the lunch that Boaz had provided. It was provided for his harvesters, but he also invited Ruth to participate. We saw that back in verse 14 of chapter 2, where it said, and at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread into the vinegar. So she, Ruth, sat beside the reapers, and he, Boaz, served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied. And here we go, had some left. So that's what she was bringing an offering to Naomi. Well, next, Naomi begins some questioning. Evidently, she was still in the dark about where Ruth had gleaned. And you see this in verse 19. Her mother-in-law then said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed." So she was blessing whoever it was that allowed her to glean so much. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz." Well, Naomi had wished a blessing on whoever it was. Now she's going to repeat that again. But Ruth had dropped a bombshell, completely unaware of what it was going to mean to Naomi, I'm sure. So Naomi begins to perk up a bit, and the conversation turns from barley to Boaz. Verse 20. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord, Yahweh, who hath not withdrawn his kindness to the living and the dead." Again, Naomi said to her, "The man is our relative. He's one of our closest relatives." Well, what's the first point we see? Naomi recognized that Yahweh was at work in this situation. Remember, she had thought Yahweh was responsible for her hard times and suffering. Now she says, "Oh, he's at work here. I'm glad he hasn't withdrawn his help from us." But she would have known that Yahweh looks after the helpless and needy and ordered Israelites to do the same. She would have known that from Leviticus 25, verse 35, where it says, "Now in the case of a countryman of yours becomes poor, and his means with regard to you falter, then you are to sustain him." Somebody who's in need, you are to sustain him. Like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. So he was saying you got to have a heart of compassion and you have to act on it to resolve the situation. So Naomi now is moving from despair, the bitterness that she had said upon her arrival. Remember, she said, "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter. And she's changed to one of anticipation, thankfulness, and hope. We'll see in a bit why she has hope with this close relative, Boaz. Let's look at verses 20 and 21 from chapter 1. This is just a reminder. "And she said to them," this was the women who were greeting her when they entered Bethlehem, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." So her difficulty, she said God was responsible for. Some truth to that, but not negative truth. "I went out full," she says, "but the Lord has brought me back empty." She said, "I went out with a husband and 2 sons. I come back and I have none of the 3. Why do you call me Naomi, pleasant, since the Lord has witnessed against me?" In other words, she's saying the Lord is saying something about Naomi is not right, and the Almighty has afflicted me. So again, she was blaming God as the source of her problems. But why the emotional and spiritual shift right now? Excuse me. Well, it comes from the fact that Boaz is a close relative, one of the closest. That fact has a number of possible implications for Naomi and for Ruth, for that matter. A close relative was labeled in those days kinsman redeemer. We spoke about this 2 or 3 sessions ago. Kinsman redeemer had legal responsibilities, and we talked about that. They were to redeem a family member from slavery if that member had sold themselves into slavery for economic reasons. And they also were to redeem family property that was sold because of financial hardship. So those were 2 of the reasons that, or the things that the kinsman redeemer was supposed to do if he had the capability. But there were a couple more. One, to accept levirate marriage responsibilities. Remember, levirate is from the Latin meaning son-in-law, so it's a son-in-law marriage. So if a woman's husband dies without her having given him a son as a heir, H-E-I-R, then the brother-in-law was to marry her and provide her a son who would be considered the son of her original husband and continue the family line. And that would be continuing the line from Elimelech, Naomi's husband, through her own husband and on. Well, about the other one was to avenge criminal acts against a family member. And this was called, in that case, it would be called the Blood Avenger, particularly where murder had been involved or death of some sort. Now, what about the Blood Avenger? That's one of the 3 different things, the kinsman redeemer, the levirate marriage, and so forth. This is the one we did not talk about in the previous session. And to give you a brief update of it, look at Numbers 35, verses 11, 12, and 13, where God is speaking. It says, you shall select for yourself, probably Moses actually, you shall select for yourselves cities to be your cities of refuge, that the manslayer who has killed any person unintentionally may flee there. And the city shall be to you as a refuge from the avenger, or blood avenger, so that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for trial. And the cities which you are to give shall be your 6 cities of refuge. And by the way, those 6 were 3 of those on the east side of the Jordan for those tribes that took an early allotment of land before they actually got into Canaan. The other 3 were to be in the original Canaan's area that they were to inhabit shortly. Well, then you see why the Blood Avenger, he was out for blood, period. Somebody killed a member of his family, he was going to go kill them. But this says this was a protection, that if it were an accident, the person responsible for the death, the accidental death, could run to one of these 6 cities, and the Blood Avenger could not touch him there until there had been a trial and determined whether the manslayer was guilty or not, guilty of murder or not. And the cities, again, there were 3 on the east side of the Jordan, 3 on the west side of the Jordan. So the Blood Avenger is just who you think he was. The reference to the living and the dead is an interesting one. It's important here because Ruth is living and her husband Mahlon, Mahlon, is dead. But here also, Naomi is living and her husband Elimelech is dead. So here's a question for all you guys out there. Boaz was not a brother of Mahlon. So the brother-in-law bit doesn't fit Boaz. How could Boaz do something for Mahlon, or for that matter, how could he do something for Elimelech? Well, stay tuned. We're going to find out. Ruth wasn't finished telling Naomi of Boaz's activities and help. Evidently, Naomi had interrupted her, so Ruth goes back and finishes what she wanted to say. Verse 21, chapter 2. Then Ruth the Moabitess, who notice we are continually reminded that Ruth is from Moab and she is a foreigner to the land of Israel. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, furthermore, he, Boaz, said to me, you should stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest. That would be the barley and wheat both. So Naomi must have been blown away by Boaz's generosity. That probably gave her some ideas that you'll see later. Excuse me. Naomi begins counseling Ruth about the blessings that Boaz's invitation would mean. Verse 22. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, notice Naomi calls her daughter, that you go out with his, Boaz's maids, his ladies that were working in the harvest, lest others fall upon you in another field. The concern? Remember, this was the time of the judges. It was a time of rampant immorality. Ruth, as a foreigner, would likely be open to other farmers and harvesters being hostile, or even worse. Anyhow, Ruth took the advice. She continued to glean only with Boaz's crew. Verse 23, our last verse for this session. So she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. So she and Ruth and Naomi continued to live in Bethlehem. Ruth continued to glean, providing food each day. If she had that same kind of result she had the first day, each day she would have prepared or gleaned enough food for several weeks of meals. So she's worked up a pretty good cushion there for Naomi and Ruth, at least for the time being. Let me ask you another question. Why do you think Boaz didn't just hire Ruth, who was an excellent worker? Why did he just allow her to glean? And since she was so good, why didn't he hire her? Well, we don't know, but think about it. And think of Naomi, who saw a radically different reality than had anticipated just days ago. What was new? Well, God was once the source of Naomi's suffering and hopelessness. At least that's what she thought. But now she sees him as the source of her joy that is to come. So she has gone from pleasant to bitter and back to pleasant again. Well, we can have a couple takeaways from this. First, God is at work in the believer's daily life, whether seen or sensed or not. God's providential care always provides hope. God expects his people to act with compassion in the case of the less fortunate and the needy. That doesn't just go for Israel. You've seen that in a couple different books. First John, James. James says he comes to you, he's hungry and cold. You say, go away, be fed and warm. And he said, what good are your words if you don't help? So Boaz has made the lives of Naomi more, and Ruth. Did I get that right? Again, Boaz has improved the life of Naomi and Ruth, both of them, they're made more tolerable, their lives, with Ruth's gleaning. But here's another question. What happens to the two women when harvest is over? They probably weren't going to collect a year's worth of grain in the gleaning that Naomi did, that Ruth did. I'm having trouble tonight, huh? But don't count Naomi out. She now has the full story, and this lady's got a plan. But don't rush to make her out as the heavy in this story. Everything she is going to do was kosher, above board, and legal. Makes for some interesting conversations what she's going to do, but there's nothing culturally a problem with what she's going to do. But here's the question. She's going to ask Boaz, or get around to Boaz having to decide whether or not he's willing to be their kinsman redeemer and to fulfill Naomi's expectation. Will he do that? Well, I think his generosity probably leads Naomi to think he will, but that does not mean that he will. So stay tuned. There's some activity ready to happen, and it's going to begin in our next session. I'll look to see you then.